For our film project, we watched Gone with the Wind, a movie released in 1939. We looked at what was happening with society during that time and decided to incorporate our majors, biology, education, finance, and psychology, to discuss how they can relate to society at the time and in the film. The film was a significant cultural moment because it was a part of Hollywood's response to the economic downturn that was the Great Depression. The film granted a form of escapism that resonated with audiences weary from the years of economic hardship. The bold sets, costumes, and romanticized portrayal of the South were a complete contrast to the struggles of the daily life people were facing.
Victor Fleming's 1939 classic Gone with the Wind offers much more than just being an iconic piece. As a biology major, let's examine it through a biological lens to further understand human instincts like survival, attraction, and social behavior. Survival is a core biological instinct, and when I think of this instinct, I think of the fight or flight mechanism. Scarlett O'Hara's journey throughout this film demonstrates this mechanism. After the war, Scarlett's resolve to rebuild Tara is visually emphasized through this close-up shot here on the left. The camera isolates her, focusing on her determined expression. This framing choice conveys her fight or flight response, highlighting her focus on survival and preservation in the face of overwhelming adversity. This visual technique makes her survival instinct feel immediate and raw, so audiences can connect with that visual expression. Attraction is another biological force, and is explored through Scarlett's relationships. On the left is Ashley Wilkes and Scarlett. You can see her bond with Ashley is captured in soft, warm lighting, symbolizing security and conventional traditional attraction. In contrast, her relationship with Rhett on the right is framed with harsher lighting, reflecting his intensity and strength. This visual contrast highlights how throughout the film, Scarlett shifts in attraction from security with Ashley to a more powerful dominant pull toward Rhett, representing the biological drive for dominance and passion in a romantic selection. This film also dives into social behavior, specifically gender roles and hierarchy. Let's take a look at this short clip so we can analyze it.
I said Mrs. Charles Hamilton.
She will not consider it so.
Oh, yes, I will. My goodness.
As you can see in the ballroom scene, all of the women are together and included in the middle, or at least next to somebody. Scarlett is framed apart from the other women, emphasizing her challenge to traditional social expectations by essentially standing up for herself and refusing to become this passive, dependent role. Her isolation visually suggests her defiance of this gender role during this time, and her emergence as a self-determined, independent figure. This positioning reflects Scarlett's disruption of the established social norms, highlighting her shift from being a passive to a more dominant figure in social hierarchy.
Gone with the Wind is not directly related to the Great Depression or educational reform. However, the film provides insights to the way the film industry and society dealt with issues of race, class, gender, and history in a time with economic hardship and societal change. As well as many viewers who watched the movie on its release resonated with the Civil War film and linked it to the Great Depression. Bringing education into the mix, the film's impact on education focuses around areas of historical narratives, media literacy, and the representation of marginalized groups. The film reflects the realities of the past, making it a valuable resource for understanding how history is taught and consumed in pop culture. For example, Gone with the Wind focuses around a society where formal education is often reserved for the upper class, with a small amount of emphasis on practical or academic learning for the lower class students, especially around women. The main character, for instance, Scarlett, has a limited formal education with her school, focusing on the skills and expectations of Southern womanhood, which is running a house or plantation and managing social interactions. The movie reflects the gendered and class-based education systems of the Old South, where education was only for the most elite. Gone with the Wind shows a version of American history that is controversial and criticized often for the romanticization and inaccurate depiction of the South, the Civil War, and slavery. The film's portrayal of the South, sharing a noble and tragic society, ignores the brutal realities of slavery, which has been challenged by historians and educators for the whitewashed version of history. In the past, teachers have used Gone with the Wind in history courses to discuss the ways in which historical events can be mythologized and disordered in pop culture. This movie was released at a time where spirits were low and the people needed to remember the quote-unquote hardships America has endured to get to where it is today. However, it teaches the wrong narrative and portrays characters like Mammy as completely loyal and contented, which contrasts greatly to the historical realities of the exploitation and brutality enslaved people had to endure.
Gone with the Wind by Victor Fleming explored various psychological perspectives within the context of historical romance in the Reconstruction era. Scarlett O'Hara's reaction to trauma and grief, and Rhett Butler's reaction to denial and guilt are the two psychological perspectives we will be focusing on in this paper.
Scarlett's strength of character can be viewed through the lens of societal pressures during the Reconstruction era. She had to navigate a patriarchal society that demanded resourcefulness and resilience from women for survival. This expectation calls attention to her response, as her adaptiveness reflects the historical need for women to prioritize survival over emotional sensitivity. Rhett's emotional disconnection can also be seen within societal norms for men in the Reconstruction era, where vulnerability was stigmatized. The culture intensifies his internal conflict as his complicated guilt clashes with the expectations of masculinity.
In Scarlett's Refuge, she returns to find her mother dead and her father emotionally unstable. This resulted in a mix of disbelief, grief, and determination. Those combined highlight how trauma forces individuals to adapt rapidly. Her commitment to thrive in a world turned upside down rather than succumbing to despair is an example of a psychological coping mechanism. When she decided to focus on her actionable goals, she regained a sense of control, which is a natural response to the stresses of life. This aligns with the psychological concept of dissociation, where individuals suppress emotional pain to concentrate on immediate needs. Her resilience comes at the cost of her emotional health, as her suppression of grief creates strained relationships and moments of emotional breakdown.
Rhett's emotional withdrawal is an effect of his intense mourning after the loss of his daughter Bonnie in her tragic horse riding accident. He begins to isolate himself, refusing to bury her and clinging to her memory. This represents complicated bereavement, which is a condition where grief is long-lasting and makes it difficult to recover after a loss. Rhett's inability to accept the loss signifies the impact of his denial. Unlike Scarlett, who channels her grief into action, Rhett's inability to reach acceptance shows an unprocessed loss, which deepens the psychological complexity of his character. The film's portrayal of his grief captures the reality of the loss of a loved one.
Another psychological aspect in Gone with the Wind is the application of post-traumatic stress disorder. Within society, this is a fairly known disorder and can be triggered by many different factors. In the film, Scarlett and Rhett both experience symptoms of this disorder from personal losses and societal expectations that they both emotionally collapse from. The personal losses from Scarlett include the death of her mother, the destruction of her house, and the loss of her first husband. The personal losses from Rhett stem from his daughter's accident and his horrors from being in the war. The typical response to post-traumatic stress disorder is reflected in these losses.
The psychological complexities of Gone with the Wind thoroughly capture the highs and lows of the human experience. Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler's sorrow is exemplified in the film to destigmatize grief by portraying it as a natural response to loss. Rhett's mourning for Bonnie demonstrates the uncontainable nature of parental grief, while Scarlett's reaction to trauma reflects her determination to suppress emotional pain. Both characters highlight the lasting impact of their experiences, and through this, the film empathizes with those navigating similar struggles. Gone with the Wind explores humanity, capturing its resilience and its fragility.
Given my major is finance, I decided to focus on the financial state the economy was in during the 1930s. The economy was experiencing one of the biggest downfalls we have seen around the world in history, known as the Great Depression. It can be defined as a severe worldwide economic crisis primarily caused by structural weaknesses in the global economy, compounded by the U.S. stock market crash of 1929. It caused widespread unemployment, poverty, and social upheaval. People lost their savings, homes, and a sense of security. But what made the Depression truly impactful was how it shaped society, and the examples we see throughout the film, Gone with the Wind. Though set during the Civil War and Reconstruction, the movie resonated deeply with the Depression-era audiences because of its themes of survival, resilience, and economic devastation. In the film, Scarlett O'Hara's famous moment at Tara, clutching a radish and swearing, "As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again." That scene struck a chord with viewers living through food shortages and breadlines. Scarlett's fight to rebuild her life mirrored the determination of countless Americans struggling to survive during the Depression. Scarlett's willingness to adapt, whether by working the land or running her lumber mill, reflected the need for Americans to find new ways to survive. It's a story of economic struggle and survival. Another effect caused by the Great Depression was the loss of wealth and social status. In the film, Gerald O'Hara, Scarlett's father, struggles to cope with the loss of Tara's wealth and status, ultimately leading to his mental decline. This reflects the emotional toll of financial ruin on individuals and families who had been part of the middle or upper class before the Depression, many of whom faced similar mental health struggles due to their losses. It resonated with the 1930s audiences because it reminded them of a truth they knew too well. When the old ways of life crumble, resilience and adaptability are the keys to starting over. The last example that exemplifies the Great Depression is Scarlett's closing declaration, "Tomorrow is another day," which encapsulates her unrelenting optimism and determination to rebuild her life no matter the obstacles. This mirrors the spirit of many who persevered through the hardships of the 1930s, holding on to hope that better times lay ahead. On the contrary, many did not possess this mindset and caused a great challenge that many during this time could not overcome.